Hello and welcome to the PFF live Q&A. I'm Ari butchering this. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Ari Meirov and Brad Spielberger. Ari, how are you doing today?
Doing really well. We're back here for the second time this week because this week has been absolutely insane. So much has gone on. The NFL has been all over the place, on the field, off the field, and we have a lot to cover here.
Brad, how are you doing today?
Did you guys know the trade deadline was this week? I don't know if you guys knew that.
It's funny. I mean, we all expected a lot of movement at the trade deadline. We'll get into that a little bit later about what transpired. But I would say that Wednesday was significantly crazier than Tuesday, and probably even crazier than we expected Tuesday to be. So let's go over some of the things that did happen on Wednesday, one of which is the drama surrounding Odell Beckham Jr. He's now been held out of practice for 2 straight days. The Browns were not able to trade Beckham at the trade deadline, but it does still seem like some sort of divorce between the Browns and Odell Beckham Jr. is possible. It makes sense to some degree that the Browns were not able to move on from Beckham at the trade deadline just because of the amount of salary that's still left on his 2021 contract, $8.1 million. The salary cap was lowered this season, so a lot of the contending teams simply just don't have that amount of money. Now, if Odell Beckham Jr. is waived, then a team could have the right, could decide to claim him. They would take on that $8.1 million salary. If they allow him to pass through waivers and become a free agent, then they could just basically sign him to a veteran minimum contract, which opens up the possibilities that he could go to a number of different teams. But Ari, how do you see all of this playing out with Odell Beckham?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it feels like all of it was strategically planned for him to go out with his father posting on the day of the trade deadline, and then LeBron, who is a Cleveland icon, basically saying free OBJ from Cleveland, which is interesting to see. And it's going to be interesting because it's obvious it's not working. It hasn't worked with Baker. There was that one game last year against Dallas where I was like, oh, they finally put the ball in his hands. It's working. He had 3 touchdowns. They're getting it involved. And then it just went back to the way it always was. And then he got hurt on a Baker Mayfield interception, tore his ACL, came back this year, still has no touchdowns. It's not working, and it feels like it's time to probably move on. The problem that's here is that, yes, Cleveland is in last place in the AFC North, but they're still very much in it in this playoff race. And if you are going to release him, you're giving these teams in the AFC an opportunity to take him, and possibly even a team in your division like Baltimore, who hasn't even played Cleveland this year. They have 2 games against them this year. They could make it work money-wise as well. He could end up there and end up torching you this year. And that's where it could possibly become a little bit tricky here for Cleveland. So, there are a bunch of reports out there that, they don't want him back in there. Kevin Stefanski said we moved on from him. We'll see where this ends up going. We've heard that GM Andrew Berry is talking to his agent about what to do next. It does sound like they're going to move on, but are they going to move on by cutting him, or are they going to move on by leaving him on the active roster and just leaving him there like what the Houston is doing right now with Deshaun Watson? So that's kind of where we are right now. It's hard to envision him coming back to the team and walking back into the locker room after what his dad posted and after what LeBron said as well. It's obviously something that it looks like it's Odell planned out on his own. Just to be fair to him, I mean, he has been pretty good throughout the situation with Baker Mayfield up until now, for the most part. When he was with New York, we had all those angry moments on the sideline. We had the interview with Josina and Lil Wayne. He hasn't really done that in Cleveland. He's held up until now, but it looks like it's better for everyone to move on at this point in time.
Yeah, well, speaking of Josina Anderson and the connection you made to Deshaun Watson, I think the interesting thing here is that the reason Houston's able to do that is because Watson has no interest in playing and is not going to force the issue or say anything or do anything. But in the NFL, you're not allowed to suspend a player with pay. You either have to suspend them and not pay them, or if they want to play, which Josina Anderson, I think very intentionally, and the wording there is very intentional, he tried to go to practice. He wants to play Sunday, suggesting that either, find conduct detrimental, which doesn't seem to be there, or you have to let him suit up, or obviously we are thinking he wants to get waived. And so that is the interesting component to it all is this rectifiable? I think they may have thought it was. and that may be changing as time goes on and as they have these negotiations. But long story short, we do seem to think he's going to get waived eventually. As you mentioned, maybe the thinking is we can't empower an AFC team to get even better. But at the same time, the New Orleans Saints were reportedly the only team that at least tried to explore a trade. Odds are they were trying to do the same thing they did with Bradley Roby, where all the money would have stayed in Cleveland. They would have brought him in for draft compensation. Ultimately, Cleveland probably was not getting the return they wanted. This has been a big question, but people saying, well, why not just take a 6th-round pick? It's better than nothing. When Von Miller does the same thing, almost the same amount of salary for a 2nd and a 3rd, you can't really justify taking a 6th-round pick and doing the same thing. I get that sounds silly and illogical, but optics and precedent matter a lot in the NFL.
Yeah, at that point, you almost have to figure out that, figure something out between the player and the team rather than just taking on a low draft pick. There are a couple of other situations that tie into this in my mind, and that is the Michael Thomas injury. Michael Thomas out for the season now with the ankle. He's not coming back. So that leaves the Saints really extremely depleted at the wide receiver position. Probably they have one of the weaker wide receiver rooms in the NFL. Maybe the Lions are really the only weaker team. So they could certainly be a team. Obviously, like you said, they were exploring a trade for Odell Beckham. They're a team that could either, try to get him once he's cleared waivers, just because they don't have the cap space to take on his contract. But then the other situation is Deshaun Jackson. He was waived on Wednesday. He will clear waivers, or he'll either be claimed by a team or clear waivers at 4 p.m. here on Thursday. And I think that plays into things as well, because that's another starting caliber wide receiver that's suddenly on the market, either via waivers or once he clears waivers via free agency. He's another player that I personally would not expect a team to claim him, but some of those other teams that could be interested in Odell Beckham Jr., Las Vegas Raiders, Los Angeles Chargers, are teams that also could be interested in Deshaun Jackson. And, just looking at his situation coming from the Los Angeles Rams, probably be easiest to stay either in the same city that he just played in and go over to the Chargers, or a team like the Las Vegas Raiders, who just lost Henry Ruggs. They released him after he had the DUI that resulted in a fatality. So they need help at wide receiver as well. And obviously Las Vegas, Los Angeles, not very far apart. So I'd say that, if Odell Beckham Jr. does wind up available, Ari, what are the teams that you would expect to be pursuing him?
Yeah, so we already mentioned New Orleans. You, of course, went to college in LSU, so there is a connection over there with that city. And then I think the team that would become very interesting is, I think, Green Bay, where, we've seen them being aggressive already. We know that Aaron Rodgers wants to see this front office be aggressive. They could use somebody alongside Devontae Adams, someone who has a little bit more star power. And it feels like a guy like Odell teaming up there with Devontae Adams, with an Aaron Rodgers, is something that is very, very intriguing. Of course, you would have to clear waivers first, but if that does happen, I think a team like Green Bay would make sense. A team like Las Vegas would make sense. A team like New Orleans, like I just said before, would make sense. There are teams out there that would make sense for him. And I think one thing for him, when he left New York with Eli Manning, everyone said, oh, he's leaving an older quarterback, aging quarterback, and joining a Baker Mayfield #1 overall pick, somebody who's younger, someone will get the ball to him. It clearly didn't work out. I feel like he wants to go to somewhere where he has a veteran quarterback who's been doing this for a while, someone who basically could really just is not growing into the game right now, not developing as he goes. Someone who's been in the game for a while, and that would make sense for a guy like Aaron Rodgers or a guy like Derek Carr. So I think that's something else to watch as well.
And
when he
Brad, are there any contending teams that actually have the cap space at this point, where that they might actually be able to cut the line and claim him on waivers? I know it's a lot of money, but is that at least a possibility with any contenders?
Yeah, really only two that jump out would be the Cincinnati Bengals and the Los Angeles Chargers that have just enough room and they can move some things around and make it work. I think the Chargers could make sense. The Bengals are obviously pretty loaded at wide receiver. Also, I think a dark horse team here that expressed interest last year, maybe more just the fact that it's Tom Brady, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I know they're loaded at wide receiver, but these are the type of moves that I think when Aaron Rodgers complained about his situation before this season, a lot of people probably, are thinking he wants them to go out and make some huge signing or huge trade, when in reality, these little moves like this, like potentially signing Odell Beckham Jr. for a veteran minimum deal, about $600,000 for the rest of the season were he to clear waivers, those moves make or break, playoff runs. And so I do think, I'm sure Tampa would love to once again troll Aaron Rodgers and swoop in there and get him. Also, to the Deshaun Jackson point, you mentioned the Raiders. We can confirm that the Raiders are also interested as well. So there is a potential union there to replace, another speedster that we'll get to, of course. But two receivers that can make an impact this season can help teams win right away.
Yeah, and the betting favorites right now for Odell Beckham, the New Orleans Saints, Baltimore Ravens, number 2, Raiders, Bills, and Patriots. Any of those teams would certainly be interesting. Let's get into the Aaron Rodgers situation. We talked quite about the Packers as it relates to Odell Beckham, but the Packers will be without their starting quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, on Sunday, and what was supposed to be a marquee matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Jordan Love will be the starter. It looks like Blake Bortles will be his backup coming off the practice squad, despite the fact that he only spent a few weeks on their team in July before Aaron Rodgers reported to the Packers. But this was a surprise that, first of all, obviously Aaron Rodgers did test positive for COVID, but then the fact that he was actually unvaccinated, because I think that everyone assumed back during the summer when he said that someone asked him, "Are you vaccinated?" He said, "Yeah, I'm immunized." And we actually have the clip if we can play that right now.
Any conversation. Are you vaccinated, and what's your stance on vaccinations?
Yeah, I've been immunized. There's a lot of conversation around it, around the league, and a lot of guys who have made statements and I've made statements, owners who made statements. There's guys on the team that haven't been vaccinated. I think it's a personal decision. I'm not going to judge those guys. There's guys who have been vaccinated that have contracted COVID. So it's an interesting issue.
So first of all, he answered the question, yeah, kind of averted his eyes a little bit. But the more damning statement to me is there are guys on the team who aren't vaccinated. I'm not going to judge them. Was he speaking about himself in the third person there or something? Because, technically that was him. And there's a deeper conversation here about, whether the Packers allowed him to break COVID protocol by doing press conferences indoors and everything. But I don't know. This is a significant deal. And I also think it's very interesting that now we're going to get a chance to see Jordan Love start a game that he otherwise would not have been able to start before an offseason with a lot of other uncertainty around Aaron Rodgers, where we don't know where he's going to play in 2022. And, how Jordan Love performs in this game could go a long way toward what happens next year with the Packers at the starting quarterback position. But Brad, what was your reaction to all of the Aaron Rodgers news that came out on Wednesday?
Yeah, so obviously, we could probably do an entire show just breaking this down. I do think there might be confusion about, the outrage, and I think it's more about the messaging and the fact that you misled people and didn't let other people make a decision, an informed decision for their own right. We're not just saying that we should control what Aaron Rodgers does, but it's playing with words like that is dangerous, and it sounds like by all accounts they're not going to get in any trouble both at an organizational level and at an individual level, which I think sets a pretty bad precedent. But he's Aaron Rodgers, so I'm not super shocked by that. I'll say different angle, though, taking a little bit differently. Jordan Love, as you mentioned, will be starting against the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the worst defenses in the NFL this year. Aaron Rodgers gets announced out, and the spread goes from the Packers +1 to +8. It moves a full touchdown. And if you're not super familiar, yes, when a starting quarterback goes out, there is big line movement, but generally, even the best of quarterbacks, you'll hear they're worth about 4 to 5 points against the spread. 7 points is a lot, and it's also crazy when you consider Aaron Rodgers isn't dropping off to some bum backup. It's a 2020 first-round draft pick who I thought looked decent in the preseason. Yes, he's not Aaron Rodgers, but long story short, if you can find +8 or +7.5 at a book, and I think it's a decent bet, I'm already on it. Anyways, the long-term implications of Jordan Love will be fascinating as well. If he plays really well, it'll be really interesting to see how that narrative grows.
Yeah, that's for sure fascinating. I just want to say one thing about what Aaron said there in late August. So Aaron went through his own treatment in the offseason, and he believed that is considered vaccinated. And he actually told the league about this, and they looked into it, and eventually they classified him as unvaccinated. My question is, when he said those words, was it during the period when they were still looking into it? That's the thing that I'm wondering about, because maybe he really didn't have an answer yet. Am I considered vaccinated or not? That could be a possibility here, but it is very odd the way he said it, the way the words came out, very weird. And we should mention last year the Raiders got fined and they got docked the draft pick. The Saints got docked the draft pick and got fined. So the NFL has taken stands against this, and they could do it here and just send the message to the rest of the league that, hey, we cannot have this happen, and we'll see what they end up doing. They are investigating right now.
And teams are supposed to discipline their own players when they violate COVID protocols. And you can sort of understand with everything that did transpire between Aaron Rodgers and the Packers this offseason, why they might be a little bit hesitant to make those waves and discipline Aaron Rodgers for doing any of that. So we'll see how that all pans out. Let's talk a little bit about the trade deadline. Like we said, maybe not quite as active as we expected it to go, but Von Miller was traded from the Broncos to the Rams. Melvin Ingram also picked up by the Chiefs in a trade with the Pittsburgh Steelers. We did see some other movement as well. Duvernay Tardif traded from the Chiefs to the Jets, so they pick up some help there on their offensive line for either Mike White, Zach Wilson. We'll see who the starter is there moving forward here. But obviously, the biggest deal of the deadline was the Von Miller trade, and it is once again the Rams going all in, trying to get that Super Bowl. Traded a second and third round pick for Von Miller. Super Bowl favorites, I'd say, at this point there in Los Angeles. And that's the kind of move that they felt that they needed to make. And it is zigging a little bit while other teams zag and try to pick up draft picks and try to keep their teams moving along. But it's also pretty fascinating. It's almost, it's not exactly what the Saints do every year, where they go right up against the salary cap and push salaries forward and go all in that fashion. This is quite a bit different. And I'm not sure what the long-term ramifications, no pun intended, for the Rams will be by trading away all these draft picks, but they certainly have a loaded roster right now.
There's no question about it. And so that's what they're going for. And they talk about these sure things versus these draft picks. And it maybe not always works out. But the crazy thing here, I think, is the Rams already lead the NFL in sacks before you bring in Von Miller. Is he the same guy that was a Super Bowl MVP? Not necessarily, but for our grading, he's still a top 15 edge rusher in both facets. I think it's really cool. He's the third highest run defense grade. So you're not going to be able to throw or pass against that defense potentially. But my takeaway of the entire trade deadline was financially was more important than the football component and all that. So with Von Miller, the Broncos ate about $8 million just to get him off the roster, but obviously get great capital return. The Chiefs as well, I think, are the winners of the deadline because they actually added Melvin Ingram and saved themselves cap space, about $1 million, because moving Laurent Duvernay Tardif, messed that up as we probably always will, saved them a bunch of money. They brought Daniel Brown, the tight end from the Jets, back. They cleared $1 million, added a really good rotational edge rusher in Melvin Ingram, who they played against with the Chargers for the better part of a decade. So a lot of familiarity there. So I'm going to plant my flag. The NFL trade deadline going forward is going to be more exciting and more fun. I firmly believe that. I think teams are more open to it, more willing to get creative to find ways to go all in, so to speak, and win. So next year, I promise it will not be a dud again. I'm going to plant my flag.
The trade is interesting because our Sam Monson actually just really broke it down a little bit of just how the Rams value their draft picks. I know everyone thinks, they're just trading everything away. They don't really care about the draft. But their method is actually very interesting. And it's like, we're going to trade our first round picks for guys who we know are going to help right away. Matthew Stafford, Jalen Ramsey, all those guys, right? We'll trade our second round picks for Von Miller. He's going to help us right away as well right now. And we're going to stock up on those other picks, third round, fourth round, fifth round, sixth round, seventh round, by getting compensatory picks, which they are slated to get 4 for players and then 1 for Brad Holmes leaving as a general manager. And if you just look at the Rams draft history, they've been able to hit during those rounds. That's probably the key thing about this, is that if you're going to trade your early picks where there's obviously a higher success rate, you have to hit on those later picks. And if you look at just what they've been able to do, they've been able to hit on their picks. Ernest Brown was a pick this year who has been playing really, really well. They have Van Jefferson was a second-round pick. Terrell Burgess was a third-round pick. Jordan Fuller was a sixth-round pick. Taylor Rapp was a second-round pick. Darrell Anderson was a third-round pick. Cooper Kupp was a third-round pick. John Johnson was a third-round pick. Tyler Higbee was a fourth-round pick. They've been able to hit on those other picks. and they actually have roster spots and are making an impact on the roster. So their method is, hey, we're going to trade those early picks and get guys who are going to help us right away. And then our scouts are going to do their works throughout the year and help us hit those other picks in the later rounds. And it's working. So it's not a crazy method. They do value draft. They just have a different formula, and it's working. And I think fans have to realize that.
One other element here is that if Von Miller does leave in free agency, then the Rams would pick up a 2023 fifth-round pick, likely. So that's not for nothing, trading away a second and third for Von Miller and a fifth just for one season. But then this also could, help their chances of re-signing Von Miller over the offseason as well. He will be a free agent after this season, so it's a lot to give up for really half a season of a player. But if that helps them bring him back in 2022, then that helps as well. Let's get into Henry Ruggs. Obviously, a tragic situation. He was charged with a DUI, resulted in a fatality. A young woman, I think she was 22 years old, and her dog died in the crash. Henry Ruggs was going 153 miles per hour, I believe it was. His blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit, and essentially, if he's found guilty of what he was charged, then there's a minimum 2 years in prison because this is a felony. So life-changing incident for everyone involved. Obviously, we're thinking mostly of the victims' families, but for Henry Ruggs as well, this is a life-changing incident. And one of my biggest takeaways from this, and it's I guess kind of ancillary to everything else, is just that this has been an extremely difficult season for everyone else who's on that Raiders roster. Everything that happened to John Gruden, to Henry Ruggs, but just thinking about the players, the staff, the coaches on that team, it seemed obviously bad enough with everything that happened with John Gruden, and now they just have to deal with another situation that's now even worse. So that's a team that it would be easy to root for everyone who's left now on that roster, on that coaching staff, to continue to have success this season. But they're really up against it. It's been a really tough season for them overall.
No, it definitely has, and I think everybody's starting to see the leadership element that Derek Carr has. Rich Bisaccia, the interim head coach, who we all know is a players type of a guy who many people respect. I mean, he's in a really tough situation as well, and they've been handling it pretty well so far. But obviously, it's a horrible situation. I mean, Ruggs will probably never play football again. What he did is inexcusable in this day and age where you have an Uber and a Lyft where you could just press a few buttons. Mm-hmm. No one should be going behind the wheel if there's even the slightest doubt that you are impaired. So, and no car should ever be going 156 miles per hour as well. So he made an awful mistake, a mistake that left, as you said, a 23-year-old woman and her dog dead. Nothing he does will change what he did, and he probably knows that by now, but he's a 22-year-old kid. He didn't do this on purpose, obviously. He will face the consequences for what he did. I really hope others learn from what this awful situation and just the importance of not driving drunk. And, I really hope the Raiders are still going to be there for him because, again, he's 22. I wasn't surprised that they released him, but the kid is basically in hell right now. So I just hope that they're still going to be there for really all the families that are involved here because their worlds have really just been turned upside down these last 48 hours.
Yeah, like you mentioned, our thoughts are with Tina Tintor and her family first and foremost, 110%. I guess just another angle of this as well. I saw people mentioning Dante Stallworth, actually a pretty similar situation. There was a lot more gray area there. He was drunk and hit a passenger, but or hit a walker, a pedestrian. But that individual, I believe, was also there was thoughts if they were not supposed to be in the street. Like there was more questions as to fault and stuff like that. This is very black and white. Very cut and dry. It is inexcusable. I hear you for sure. And yes, Ruggs obviously is probably no one's more upset with Ruggs than himself. And I understand all of that. But yeah, he should have been released. And kudos to the Raiders for acting so quickly. They are a progressive organization. They espouse that, but I think they walk the walk and don't just talk the talk. And so I did respect that. They didn't wait around. They didn't dilly dally. It may not have been officially processed yet, but they wanted it to be known. We don't condone this behavior, and he's been immediately removed. It doesn't matter that he's a ascending, really good young player. That does not matter.
Right, absolutely. And Dante Stallworth was able to turn things around. He's really been an advocate for, obviously against drunk driving and everything like that. And we'll see if Henry Ruggs can do something similar. But really a very tragic situation, like Ari said, inexcusable behavior from Henry Ruggs that caused a loss of life. That will do it for this week's PFF Live Q&A. Keep it on pff.com for all of the news and analysis that's going on. We've got a Thursday night game, Jets and Colts tonight. So keep it on PFF for all of your betting and fantasy info for that as well. You can follow Ari on Twitter at MySportsUpdate. You can follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. You can throw me a follow as well at Doug Kyed. And we will be back with you guys again on Monday.
Who has the better quarterback?